Episode 42, Excelsior, Stanley.
Welcome to the Visionary Variety Podcast, where we cover all kinds of cool stuff like photo, video, film, books, and technology. So switch on your brain and enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast, listeners. Today we are going to be doing, as you probably suspected, a tribute to Stan Lee. He passed away November 12th. That was earlier this week, as of this recording, and he died at the age of 95. Very sad. He was a very inspirational character, and the more that I looked into his life, I just realized we got to do something. We got to bring it, and we can't just be like, "Hey, did you hear about this happened this week? Okay, let's move on, talk about other stuff." That would be a crime. Given what we cover in this show, I mean, we love Marvel, we love comic book characters, we love imagination and stories. That's pretty much the heart of this podcast. And, we got to do some kind of tribute to this guy. He was a really amazing and inspirational character. So, yeah, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about his life, his early life, his career in Marvel, and some of the ideas that he had that were really revolutionary. And I think it'll be a really great kind of way to remember him. And it will also explain a lot of the success of the Marvel characters and sort of the early days of how things got started in the right direction, and really what's carried it through to the huge success it is today. So, Angela, why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of his early life?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, ever since he was a little kid, Stan had always enjoyed writing, and he entertained dreams of one day writing the great American novel. But before he could get onto those kinds of dreams, he worked such part-time jobs such as writing obituaries for news services and press releases for the National Tuberculosis Center, delivering sandwiches for the Jack May Pharmacy to offices in Rockefeller Center, working as an office boy for a trouser manufacturer, ushering at the Rivoli's Theater on Broadway, and selling subscriptions to the New York Herald Tribune newspaper.
Talk about odd jobs.
I know, right?
He just did whatever he had to do.
I know, he's pretty relatable in that sense. So in 1939 is when he was hired as an assistant for a publishing company called Timely Comics, and that is the company that would later become Marvel. So initially he was like a gopher kind of assistant. He would refill ink bottles, he would go get people lunch, all that sort of stuff.
Humble beginnings.
I know. And a couple years later, at just under 19 years old, Stan was installed as an interim editor until they could find a replacement. But despite his young age, he showed a knack for the business that led him to remain the comic book division's editor-in-chief, as well as art director for much of that time until 1972 when he became publisher.
That is awesome. At 19 years old. Can you imagine doing that at 19?
No.
And like, one thing that I've really learned about culture and back in his day was that comics were different than when they are now.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure.
They didn't have the seriousness and the reality element to them. I don't feel. It was really just for younger kids and really just for boys. It seemed like
honestly, like
boys.
preteen and under, I think. And
yeah,
if you were working for comics, you were pretty much like low social status on the writing side of things, which is kind of why he adopted his pen name Stanley in the first place. His birth name is Stanley Martin Lieber. And since he had the dreams of wanting to make the great American novel someday, when he actually, would have his author credit in it, he did not want his real name to be tied back to comics. So that's why he created the name Stanley in the first place. So it's just crazy.
Wow, that stinks. You got to hide up your identity because you want to be successful one day with it.
So funny how everything just flipped around.
Nowadays, everyone wants their name to be on a comic.
Yeah. Makes you wonder how times will change like 40 years from now, if anything. That's like weird. Nowadays, it's going to become like the greatest thing.
Yeah.
So after that stint in his life, he served a few years in the Army from 1942 to 45. And then he went back to working at the same publishing company, but it changed its name to Atlas Comics. And in the mid-50s, Stan wrote a lot of different kinds of genres of stories. He wrote romance and westerns, comedies, science fiction, medieval adventure, horror, and suspense, which seems kind of crazy to me. I want to know what kind of crazy stories he wrote back in the day.
Yeah, can I find those? I would love to compile those and just read them all.
Man, that would be crazy. I bet they're worth a fortune nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
However, at the end of this period, he had become very unhappy with his career and he considered quitting the field. See, Stan was tired of the same old action comics. He wanted to bring in the human part of superheroes. He wanted the characters to be role models for kids and keep them out of trouble. But his bosses kept pushing the same popular style of fights and action on every page, but he wanted to develop personality for his characters. So in the late 50s, DC kind of revamped The Flash and also with the Justice League, and they experienced a lot of success doing so. So in response, Stan's publisher assigned him to come up with a new superhero team. So Stan's wife suggested that he experiment with stories he preferred since he was planning on changing careers and had nothing else to lose at this point. And so Stan Lee collaborated with artist Jack Kirby to create their first superheroes, the Fantastic Four, in 1961. And as I think most of us here know, that is basically Marvel's very first success.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting how, he was at the point of wanting to quit. He wasn't happy with what he was doing. Even though he had a pretty sweet job and was doing, was active. It wasn't like he wasn't getting paid. He wasn't happy with what he was making because, he's an artist. And even though he's writing, that's still art.
Yeah.
And I don't believe he actually drew any of the comics. He wasn't an artist.
I don't believe
He
so, no. He just wrote.
An editor, the writer, conceiver, things like that. So he came up with backstories and whatnot. So that's what he did. But he wasn't happy with that creative outlet, and he hadn't yet really realized the best way to express his creativity.
Yeah.
And I can totally relate to that. As a photographer and growing up as a drawing artist, like I would find myself bored with homework assignments, or I would find myself bored after starting to draw something I thought would be cool. It wasn't really interesting anymore. Until I found those things that I really loved to draw, and I couldn't stop drawing those things.
Yeah.
It's a great feeling as an artist to find your outlet, but on top of that, to find your market, a way to monetize and make money from the thing that you love doing. That's hard to find, but it's a really special thing. And I feel happy. I'm like, oh, he found his thing, and thank God he found it.
Exactly. And
Can you imagine if he quit?
I know, right? And it's really noteworthy to mention that at this point, he was like, in his mid-30s? Or so.
Yeah.
So it's like, man, you can take a while to find your niche, but when you do, age isn't really a factor.
He was on the way out. So one of his co-creators said, well, how about you write the story of the Fantastic Four, which is now what we call it, what you want. And I mean, what's the worst you're going to do is get fired, because he was already not happy and he was not liking the direction it was going in. So
he kind of took a chance, right?
Yeah. And took a chance and was like, this is it. And it did really well. And so the Fantastic Four is a fictional superhero team appearing in the comic books that was debuted November 1961.
Wow.
Stan Lee was known for drawing the boom, pow, traditional comic book stuff. And he was just getting tired that everybody was wearing costumes. And when he took the leap of faith to write his own comic now, what we call, like I said, the Fantastic Four, he made them average Joes. He said he made them a lot like him because if he had superpowers, he wouldn't want to cover his identity. If he could jump over a building, he was going to jump over a building, and you're going to know his name of the guy that just jumped. And so he was always complimenting on how he's a showbo. Jack Kirby kind of gave him the push, and it ended up doing really, really well. Just wanted to have average Joes. He just wanted them to be everyday people. And, like as a superhero, they have their identities covered. And he wanted them just to be, like I said, just normal people. And that was one thing that Stan really wanted to do, is have a comic that was humorous, but also superhero-like. I think the company at the time was like, yeah, no, we're going to do it this way. And so this is like, his final chance that he gets to prove himself, and he's going to put himself out there. So his success was from the Fantastic Four. And as they moved on, they moved into Spider-Man. And basically his idea and his creative idea he got from it, he was just sitting in a room watching this fly on the wall climb up and down the wall. And he says, wouldn't that be crazy to think if somebody actually had that super, hero power? And so he pitched the idea, and they said, that's not a good idea. And he's like, well, he's not going to be an adult. He'll be a teenager. He says, look, Robin and Batman. Robin's a teenager. He's a sidekick. So Spider-Man will have to be a sidekick. And he's like, no, he'll be the main guy. So he went ahead and started doing the Spider-Man thing and went ahead and made it a comic. He went from the Incredible Hulk, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Daredevil, the X-Men. DC was one of their biggest competitors, and Stan Lee worked really hard to, make that not an option. And there was a couple of interviews I watched for some of this homework, and he says, I have to be careful what I said because my competitors are listening and they'll find any reason to sue me.
Oh man.
He just kept pushing forward and getting better. And I think in the early 2000s, DC actually came to him. They played with this idea and said basically, hey, can you take our Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman and create them like if they were never created and you were the creator? And so he did like a one-off spin and stuff.
Didn't
so
know
that was pretty unique.
So Stan Lee has done a lot of things. And honestly, I didn't even know that he did those one-offs for DC with the Superman Batman stories. That was really cool. And I want to find that. If any of you listeners know what that is, tell me. I want to know about this.
He's stressed. He's like, it's one and done. He's like, it was an opportunity that was too good to like give up. So, and everybody was like, I'm sure everybody's gonna be mad at me, but they gave me the opportunity to recreate a character, not their superpowers, but like the stories.
It's a cool
and stuff.
idea. Just never would have thought that would have happened. That's neat.
What are some other accomplishments that he's done?
He made the greatest superhero of all time, Stripperella,
What?
for Spike TV.
The heck is that?
Oh, I don't.
Doesn't sound up your alley, Angela.
Not really. But
What
I
were
was
you
reading
doing
up
while
on
we studied?
Stan and I saw that he created this superhero called Stripperella, and it's like a comedy series, so it's not to be taken seriously. But yeah, it's about a stripper named Erotica Jones,
Oh, gosh.
no.
and she's a superhero who has like heightened senses and can
Of course.
do sexy fight moves or something. I don't know.
Super sexy fight moves. Oh,
So
man.
yeah, it's like it lasted one season, 13 episodes, and yeah, that's about
Maybe
it.
she accidentally stripped upon a uranium rod and
There,
and it gave her superpowers.
No.
I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
Gotta keep
That's
it
hilarious.
PG.
If that's
gotta
not
keep
the
it PG.
backstory, I want that to be the backstory.
I found this pole in the trash heap, guys. It's glowing green, but I think I need a new pole.
Oh my god.
No,
I
I'm
mean, if I'm meant to answer this question seriously, I don't know what I would pick. I mean, I think Spider-Man might be my favorite.
Yeah, it is good. I mean, sure, he's super popular, and maybe people might call him overrated, but he really encapsulates the vision that Stan Lee had: is a normal guy that something happens to, or he didn't, own it or buy it or deserve it. He just something happened to this guy, and he still deals with human problems, but now he deals with superhuman problems as well.
Right.
And I just love that. And that vision was very countercultural at the time. The comics were different than, like I said earlier, one of the ways that we were different is the stories were not as deep or as believable or as grounded in reality. I feel like they were just these really fantastical tales of Mary Sue people that could do anything that came at them. They could defeat any challenge. Yeah. They had ridiculously colored and tight suits, and it was just like there wasn't a lot of believability, and it only had so deep of entertainment value that it could give because of that. And when the stories began to mature through Stan Lee's vision and editing guidance, things changed and the audience changed for comics. I heard this in a funny interview with him. He said, originally the letters that would be written to us were written in crayon by kids.
Oh.
Then eventually they were written in pencil, and they had better writing. And then they got a few like typed letters, and just the age was growing with their audience.
Awesome.
And that is a really cool sign. It's like, not that we're excluding kids, because I'm sure kids still could read and enjoy it, but it was able to reach a bigger audience because of just the content was better. So Spider-Man really, embodies that vision that he had, and it is one of his original characters. Them and Fantastic Four, who dealt with other problems too, especially as a group. And there's family involved, and there's romance involved. So a lot of new dynamics that were presented to write stories about.
The biggest thing they said about Fantastic Four is like, hey, we really loved it, the great humor, but you're gonna have to go back to the whole costume things. And so they really enjoyed it, but he was just being funny. But a lot of people miss the crazy costumes that these heroes have.
Yeah. I don't, because they don't translate well to live action movies and stuff.
No, let's not talk about the movies.
I've honestly never seen any of the movies just because I'm scared too from what I've heard. I don't want to be disappointed.
I didn't see the most recent one, but I know the original too.
Oh, I heard the most recent one was god awful. Like if I watched any of them, probably the first one.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know why exactly, but I
The
don't
first
really
one's kind of sits in the
watch it.
first same quality of like the very first Spider-Man that they ever made. It's in that kind of same
Yeah.
quality. The newest one was just like first, second, and third Star Wars with CGI galore.
Really?
Well, back to Stan Lee.
Yeah.
His character and the things that he envisioned really made its way into comics and really revolutionized how they did things. And I'm sure DC probably followed suit too, developing character stories and real
Oh
world
yeah.
problems too.
I'm sure they had to adjust their
Yeah.
writing style because
hmm
of Stan Lee being in the game and everything. Had
Yeah.
him make Batman darker and
hmm
I guess try to give Superman some issues to deal with.
Some kind of problem he couldn't fix.
Yeah.
He had to wear glasses. Ooh, that's a hard one. Another thing I learned about Stan Lee is that he seemed to have a good sense of humor.
Yeah.
He,
Yeah.
maybe it's true to the whole fact that he made fantastic and fantasy stories or fictional stories is that he didn't take things too seriously. He always seemed to be lighthearted and funny. And I mean,
Mhm.
even up till his last, years, he would still go into conventions and shaking hands and signing stuff and doing pictures with
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And I've heard nothing but sweet stuff. I turns out I didn't know this, but a ton of my cosplay friends have met him and done pictures and had interesting run-ins with him, and it's all positive. It's just he seemed like such a sweet guy.
Yeah. When I took a photo with
Yeah.
him, he was like, shook my hand. He's like, "Hey, I can't hear you, so I'm gonna smile and then just let me know when it's over." And I was like, because it was
I
so
didn't know that.
loud. Like, it was so
I'd forgotten that you
loud.
got a picture. That's funny. Yeah, he seemed like a really sweet guy, and I think that's probably played into his success. If he was a real butthole of a guy, or a non-character, just not an interesting person, he may not have gotten as far as he did in that world, in that industry. But
Yeah.
seems to be a pretty sweet and creative guy. So that I'm sure that helped him too.
Yeah.
Do you guys always look forward to the cameos in all the Avenger and
Yes.
I do.
movies?
Actually,
I love
for the
the-
whole
Yeah.
for the whole study of this, and even I watched all his cameos.
There's like 20 of them.
even-
Yeah.
Even in like,
Some of them are amazing.
you know what? I think we were talking off air, and he was in Princess Diaries. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
and
the second one.
She says, "I'm so sorry. My father gets his humor from the American Three Stooges," and I was like, "What?" Because he was very humorous and kind of
Weird.
forward with a lot of people in the.
I wonder how he even ended up in that movie. It's so weird. Random.
He's had some other interesting cameos, and I looked for some because I was like, we all know the Marvel cameos, but what else has he been? He's got to have been in some other stuff. And I found that he played a spy in the show Chuck. You guys ever seen Chuck?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard of Chuck, but
It's
I've never
funny.
watched it.
You definitely take some time to at least watch, a few episodes because it is very funny.
Okay.
It's silly funny, but at the same time, it's just a great story. So yeah, Stan Lee plays an older spy in the show.
That's awesome.
He of course has been on, parody shows like Robot Chicken. He's been on there for 3 episodes and also 3 episodes of The Simpsons as well, doing the voice
Yeah.
for himself. He was on Big Bang Theory. That was a pretty awesome moment.
Mm.
Sheldon misses getting to see him and get stuff signed by him because of a traffic ticket.
But yeah.
And then this is a little bit of a stranger cameo. He was in Big Hero 6 in a painting. There's a family portrait painting seen at the very end of Big Hero 6,
yeah.
and he is the father in the painting.
That's right. Actually, it's not that. I don't think it's that weird that he's in that movie because I think Big Hero 6 actually is a Marvel property.
Oh, cool.
I believe so, yeah. But it is neat to see like animated form of Stan Lee.
Yeah, cartoon version of him. Yeah, it's different. So I wanted to read a few quotes from him, and I feel like these quotes really capture a lot of why I really respect him as a creator and as a person. And you again, like I said earlier, you can kind of see how this has influenced the success and the flavor of Marvel. So I've got a few quotes here. The first one is, "I like things that are different. If you do what everybody expects, you're just doing the ordinary. But if you surprise people, that's fun." And he used that word a lot, fun. He did use the word fun for a lot of
He
things.
did.
And that's not a bad
That's
thing.
what I love about him.
If you're into comics, you've got to enjoy fun. You've got to enjoy humor and fictional situations. You can't take life too seriously,
Yeah.
or you're not going to make good comics.
Mm-hmm.
And that was
True.
him. So here's another quote that I really like. And this is where he talks about the culture at the time and how they viewed a comic book writer. It was not a positive or successful kind of thing to be into. So here's a quote. "I used to be embarrassed because I was just a comic book writer, while other people were building bridges or going on to medical careers. And then I began to realize entertainment is one of the most important things in people's lives. Without it, they might go off the deep end. I feel that if you're able to entertain people, you're doing a good thing. That's awesome. There's nothing wrong with entertainment. And I feel like when people start to shun entertainment for just it being entertainment, you're not even talking about what the entertainment is. If they start to insult the fact that people are enjoying entertainment, not only do you know that they're not a fun person, but
and also tell them to stop watching TV or movies or read books.
Exactly.
Or go to the theater. Or play video games, anything.
Right.
Entertainment is a part of all of our daily lives.
It is. It's part of human nature. It's healthy to have a certain amount of it. And, when you meet someone that's just got issues, you kind of wonder, are they like having any fun in life?
Yeah.
Maybe they need some comics. I don't know.
Maybe.
But he had a good point there. It's important, and it has helped a lot of people.
True.
Last quote is, if Shakespeare and Michelangelo were alive today, and if they decided to collaborate on a comic, Shakespeare would write the script and Michelangelo would draw it. How could anybody say that this wouldn't be as worthwhile an art form as anything on earth? It's true. Like if we had those people of that notoriety and historical influence write a comic book, like people would read it. It would be kind of a big deal. And it's just kind of going to say like, hey, this is important. This is art. This is not just some little book for kids, which is kind of how comics were seen at the time when Stanley was young. But he made it so much more. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Like one other thing I can think about Stan that was unique to him and fun and sort of revolutionary at the time was that I think he was the very first publisher to include the inkist and the letterer at the splash page for the credits of who worked on the comic. And he was also I think the first publisher to include little notes and anecdotes about daily life there at working at Marvel Studios, because he wanted to build a bridge between the fans and everybody at the studio, try to make them feel more personable to them. So I think that's super cool of him. I never knew that he was the first to do that, although it totally makes sense.
I bet that was such a cool feeling for those artists. I mean, they're the ones that we see, when we see a comic, it's primarily visual art. In fact, that's pretty much all it is. And they were getting no credit before that, I'm assuming, for the other companies and other, gigs.
Because nowadays it just feels natural that everybody gets a credit.
Yeah. Like people know, like, oh, I love Ditko's art. Like they'll look up artists because they know what they did and they love their style. And that's a big part of comic culture is who did what, writing and artist. It makes me think of early video games, whereas the programmers got no credit. And no name, no listing on any of the covers or booklets. And in fact, in the classic game Adventure, the programmer made a secret hidden dungeon that you could only get to with a very certain technique. And it would show his name because his name was not.
I love secrets like that.
It's so great. So but he knew his name was not going to be credited anywhere on this huge revolutionary game. So he put his name in the game. Pretty funny.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, I think that about sums up in a quick and simple way. We don't want to just go on and on and on. But I hope that this episode has educated you or maybe reminded you of some of the things that we can love and remember about Stan Lee. And in closing, I wanted to include a really powerful quote from him that kind of explains the whole Excelsior thing and also just kind of gives homage to his legacy. Here's a quote. My motto is Excelsior. That's an old word that means upward and onward to greater glory. It's on the seal of the state of New York. Keep moving forward, and if it's time to go, it's time. Nothing lasts forever. That's awesome.
Aww.
Well, thank you guys for listening, and have a great week. Thanks for listening to the Visionary Variety Podcast. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so that you won't miss any of the future episodes. You can also find our previous episodes there and listen whenever you want. We love to hear from our listeners, so if you've got any comments or suggestions for a future episode, you can always reach us at tvvpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again, and have a great week. I didn't want to do like chit-chat stuff. Like this week's I've just been crying nonstop.
Because Nate and I were talking earlier, like if we talk about like what's been going on in our lives before we basically give a memorandum to Stan Lee's life, it's like standing up at the podium at a funeral saying like, hey guys, how's your week's been? Mine's been a drag.
How about them Spurs? Am I right?
Or am I right?
Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing. It's not really fitting for this kind of episode, so we'll just get right into it.